The world held its breath as the courtroom doors opened and Sean Diddy Combs, dressed in his prison uniform, wrists shackled, shoulders heavy, was led inside by federal guards. The moment was surreal, almost cinematic. Here was a man once celebrated as one of the most powerful moguls in music, now stripped down to the reality of chains and silence. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but whispers, sketches, and the hurried notes of journalists painted the picture. The energy was electric, yet suffocating. Everyone inside the United States District Court, Southern District of New York, knew they were about to witness history unfold. The rise of a legend had already ended, but today marked the beginning of something darker, the collapse of an empire. Diddy's eyes scanned the courtroom briefly, but his stare seemed empty, almost hollow. Behind him, his lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, stood poised, clutching files like a man ready to fight one last battle. Across the aisle, prosecutors adjusted their papers, cold and confident, ready to remind the judge of every victim, every piece of testimony, every dark secret dragged into the light over the past months. And then there was Judge Arun Subramanian, calm but commanding, sitting at the head of the court like a figure who held the weight of destiny in his voice. What's chilling is how quiet the room was. No applause, no gasps, just the heavy silence of justice hanging in the air. People could barely breathe as the guards sat Diddy down at the defense table. This was not a performance, not a concert, not a red carpet event. This was raw, unfiltered reality, the kind of moment where empires don't just fade, they shatter. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way, you'll never miss any new coming videos like this. Now, let's get back to it. As the judge shuffled his notes, reporters outside the courthouse scrambled to relay every detail to the world. The flashing cameras outside, the growing crowd chanting his name, the divided fans, some praying for mercy, others demanding the harshest penalty. This was no ordinary trial. It was a spectacle, one that had been building for years. The walls of the SDNY courtroom seemed to echo with the ghosts of his past, the trial testimonies, the witnesses, the accusations that once shook the industry to its core. Every eye locked onto Diddy, but he didn't look back. He sat still, his jaw tight, his hands clenching against the table. For the first time in decades, the man who had built an empire on confidence and swagger now looked small, vulnerable, and with each passing second, the air thickened, because everyone in that courtroom knew what came next would either define or destroy everything Sean Combs had left. The silence in the courtroom didn't last long. A hush fell deeper when the prosecutor slowly rose from his chair, buttoned his jacket, and began to address the judge. His voice was steady, sharp, and cold, like a blade cutting through the air. He laid out the foundation of his argument, reminding the court that this wasn't about celebrity or fame or power. This was about accountability. This was about Sean Combs, the man, not Diddy, the icon. One by one, the prosecutor revisited the evidence that had been presented in the trial that stretched over weeks. The testimonies of 34 witnesses, the stories that still echoed in the minds of the jury, the painful words of those who described how power was abused, how money was used as a shield, and how fame masked the darkness underneath. He hammered it home. No one, not even a mogul with millions, is above the law. As the prosecutor spoke, Diddy didn't flinch. His eyes stayed down, locked onto the table, almost as if he had prepared himself for every word. His lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, scribbled notes quickly, but even he knew the weight of what was being said. The tension grew heavier with every sentence, every accusation, every reminder that this was not just another court proceeding. This was the fall of a man who once controlled the pulse of hip-hop. The prosecutor's voice grew more forceful, his words echoing through the wood-paneled courtroom. He painted the image of an empire built on money and intimidation, where glamour and luxury had always distracted the public from what was hidden in the shadows. He reminded the judge of the July 2nd verdict, acquittal on the biggest, most damning charges, but guilt on the Mann Act violations. And now, he argued, was the time for real justice. Not leniency, not sympathy, justice. Every word felt like a nail being hammered into a coffin. Reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pens moving quickly across notebooks. Some jurors from the earlier trial, sitting quietly in the back to witness this moment, looked uneasy as the prosecutor's speech dug into the bones of the case. And then came the moment that seemed to freeze the room. The prosecutor turned directly toward Diddy, his hand gesturing toward the man in the prison jumpsuit. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "what stands before you is not a superstar. What stands before you is a man who believed his power placed him above the law. Today, that illusion must end." The words hit hard. Even though Diddy didn't move, even though he stayed still, the ripple of that statement ran through the courtroom like a shockwave. Whispers broke out in the gallery, some gasps, some murmurs. The guards tightened their stance beside the defense table, ready in case the atmosphere tipped into chaos. Judge Arun Subramanian sat quietly, listening to the prosecutor, but his mind clearly weighing every word. The silence that followed the end of the prosecutor's speech was suffocating. For a moment, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. And then, slowly, it was time for the defense. All eyes turned toward Mark Anifullo. He stood, adjusted his tie, and stepped forward. His job was monumental, not just to defend a man, but to fight against a tidal wave of public outrage, the evidence of months, the weight of history itself. He looked at his client briefly, then back at the judge, and began to speak. The battle for Sean Diddy Combs' future had shifted into its most dangerous phase. Mark took a deep breath before speaking, the weight of the room pressing down on his shoulders. Every eye was on him, journalists ready to dissect his words, spectators waiting to see how he could possibly defend a man already painted as guilty in the public's eyes. And Judge Arun Subramanian, whose expression was unreadable, but whose silence commanded respect. Agnifilo placed both hands firmly on the podium and began slowly, his voice calm, measured, and deliberate. "Your Honor," he started, "what we've just heard is a portrait painted with broad strokes, meant to vilify, not to clarify. It is my duty to remind this court that Sean Combs is a man, not a myth, not a caricature, not the headline that tabloids want to sell. He has flaws, yes, but he is also a father, a son, and a figure who has given back to his community more than most in his position ever would." The defense lawyer's tone grew stronger, cutting through the thick silence. He reminded the court that the jury, the people who heard every word of the trial, who weighed testimony after testimony, acquitted Diddy of the most serious charges: racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. He stressed that the jury did not find him guilty of orchestrating a criminal empire, nor of the darkest allegations that had gripped the public's imagination. Instead, they convicted him on 2 counts under the Mann Act, serious but narrow in scope, and in no way reflective of the monstrous image the prosecution was trying to push. Mac turned slightly, gesturing toward his client, seated in chains, prison uniform wrinkled, face weary. "Look at him," he said firmly. "Does this man look like the untouchable mogul that the prosecution described? No. This is a man who has been behind bars for 2 months, stripped of freedom, stripped of power, stripped of the life he once knew. He has already felt the crushing weight of this process. He has been humbled." The gallery stirred. Some spectators leaned in closer. Even the reporters stopped scribbling for a moment to listen. Agnifilo pressed on. He highlighted Diddy's contributions, launching careers, creating opportunities, donating to schools, building foundations. He reminded the court that justice is not only about punishment, but also about balance. Your Honor, he pleaded, we cannot allow a man's legacy to be erased overnight because of the sins that the prosecution has exaggerated. This isn't about giving him a free pass. It's about recognizing that he is more than these charges. He is more than this moment. At one point, Mark paused, letting the silence work in his favor. He scanned the room before speaking again, his voice carrying a sharp edge. Now, the prosecution wants you to make Sean Combs the symbol of everything wrong in the industry. They want to turn this courtroom into a stage, and my client into the villain of a story that is bigger than him. But this is not a movie. This is a man's life. And the sentence you hand down today must reflect fairness, not fury. Diddy finally raised his head slightly. For the first time that day, his eyes met the judge's. There was no smile, no smirk,